Charging unlimited form! Team, unite up!
Roger.
Welcome to my The Wonderful 101 Remastered Beginner's Guide. If you're stumbling across this guide and you're curious about this game, make sure to check out my earlier video detailing why you should try this game out. Before we get started, I want to say who this guide is intended for and what you can gain from this. If you don't care about this information, you want to skip all this, just go ahead and go to that time on screen now. I've also included timestamps for anyone who having a particular issue with something so they can skip forward to that as well. This guide is for people who either haven't played the original or didn't get very far and are trying it out again. It's okay to be confused, and it's okay to get frustrated. That's what this guide is here to help alleviate, but it won't answer all your questions. Part of the fun is experimenting and figuring stuff out, so I won't rob you of that entirely. Even if you spend many hours into this game, there can still be new things to learn. This game is best experienced on repeat playthroughs, hitting the best ranks, mastering the mechanics, the enemies, and eventually doing all of that on the hardest difficulty, the same way Devil May Cry and Bayonetta are. It just takes a little more legwork, and on normal I would say it's a bit harder than Devil May Cry is, from personal experience. Another thing I wanted to clear up is many people say that the first playthrough is kind of a test drive, and that real game begins after that, but I think that's a little misleading. The game is actually a great ride, even if you're not trying to devote a lot of time to it. But yes, the repeat playthroughs are much better. It's just not to say the first one is bad. This guide is only meant to get your foot through the door and enjoy that first ride as much as possible. And maybe, just maybe, you'll get sucked in the way the rest of the fans do. I'm not going to be showing off complex strategies or advanced techniques that'll overwhelm you. We're going to break things down easily and make sure you're having a good time from the get-go. Finally, I'd like to say that this guide assumes you're playing on normal mode and playing with the standard controller. Nothing wrong with playing on an easier setting, especially considering normal is quite difficult, but that's just what we're going to do. And as far as keyboard and mouse controls go, they're still new, and honestly at the moment they're a little awkward, so I can't really recommend it going forward, but if you can make it work, go ahead. So let's just get off with some general advice, and then we'll get into the individual lessons. Number 1, visit the shop after every mission, including the opening tutorial. You don't necessarily need to buy something, but you should always be thinking about your next purchase. Obviously, you'll have to get better at the game yourself, but it's imperative that you get the necessary tools for the job. Later on, I'll go over what I consider the best for beginners. Number 2, ranks matter to your progression as well. Not saying you'll be getting pure platinum on everything, but higher ranks on even individual missions means more O parts to spend. If you're struggling, don't be afraid to replay an earlier mission to get a better ranking, get more O parts, and get back to the shop. Eventually, replaying the levels and going for perfect rankings becomes the most fun you got out of the game anyway. Number 3, always be on the lookout for citizens and heroes to recruit. The number of heroes dictates how large your knight morphs can be. So again, imperative to your success. Sometimes you'll find other wonderfuls in your journey. So when you recruit them, they'll permanently be added to your team, and you'll have to recruit less and less temporary heroes to reach 100. Since timing is only ranked during missions, feel free to explore in between those times as much as you want. Finally, I like to say at any point you feel like you've learned enough, something new, and feel comfortable to jump back in and start learning again for yourself, don't feel bad about closing this video. Go ahead and get back in there. The end game of this video is to get anyone who plays the Wonderful 101 to have a better time with it, so feel free to stop whenever you feel comfortable. Now let's get on to the lessons proper. Lesson 1, defense. This game is about defense as much as it is about offense. So understanding defense and properly applying it is the first step to success. Even if you're already amazing at combos or understand how to deal the most damage, it'll hardly matter if you don't understand defense. When it comes to rankings, damage is really important to avoid, and using a continue will drop your overall operation rank an entire grade. So your first priority should be buying Unite Guts and Unite Spring from the shop. And the remaster, these morphs are essentially free, and now the game explicitly tells you that they're necessary. Unite Guts, an ability that I find particularly useful, is the most important thing you can buy from the shop. Unite Guts is a temporary shield that when struck with a blunt move will bounce it off, either reflecting the attack or stunning the enemy. Some attacks will need a larger Unite Guts to repel them. This leads back to what I said earlier. You always need to be on the lookout for heroes to recruit. There's not a lot of worse feelings when your Guts actually stops an attack only for it to get crushed. That being said, Unite Guts isn't your catch-all defense maneuver either. And it also isn't as simple as just holding down the trigger. It can only be held for a certain amount of time, and the long windups of certain enemy attacks will outlast this. Once that time has elapsed, you'll have to suffer a pretty lengthy recovery period where you won't be able to bring it back up. So you have to be on your game in order to get those repels just right. But once you familiarize yourself with enemy patterns, visuals, and sound cues, it all comes together. As I stated earlier, Unite Guts is only for blunt attacks. Any piercing, slashing, lasers, and various other attacks will just go through and hit you. A little tip for you is that you can actually cancel out of Unite Guts by using Unite Spring, which not only moves you a good distance away, but has invincibility frames. There are so many attacks that Unite Guts works on that if you're only avoiding attacks, you're just going to be wasting your time and energy, especially considering that every time you get hit, your team gets scattered and you can't use any Unite morphs, and you also have to pick them back up. Getting a stun off means that instead of simply dodging, you can immediately get into your combos, and that's where the real creativity comes in. This is especially important versus enemies that don't enter a stun state easily. For example, the little thing I'll clue you in on is the turtle aliens. One of the most dreaded enemies for beginners are actually really easily handled by Unite Guts on their stomp move. You need to tip them over and you let them have it. Some of the weapon Unite morphs also have their own defensive capabilities. The most obvious one is Unite Sword, that's able to reflect lasers. And make sure you're doing that with any laser you come across, not just those turret cars. The same goes for its lightning catch capabilities, and another example is Unite Hammer's projectile blocking. Every Unite morph with some sort of defensive capability gets some use other than the game explicitly tells you, but it's up to you to connect those dots and put it into action. On repeat playthroughs, you'll have access to all the major morphs right away. Again, it's up to you to go back and apply that knowledge. Morphs aren't the only defensive capabilities that the team has. There are also certain blocks that you can buy to make your time a little easier. They're quite expensive, but I should probably go over them anyway. Hero Counter is incredibly powerful, but maybe too advanced for beginners, so I don't really recommend it. Either way, if you push forward on the control stick at the same direction that the attack is coming from, and at the correct timing, you'll repel the attack with one of your own. Ukemi, also incredibly powerful block, and while not resistant to all attacks, it's a little easier to pull off. You won't be able to combo off of it like other blocks. It's only useful if your character gets launched when attacked. If you get stomped to the ground, Ukemi won't work since you can't jump off the ground if you're stuck in it. It's a good pickup, but ideally you should be working towards never having to use it at all. It's good to note that when you use Ukemi, it doesn't affect your rank. Hero Time has a slowdown effect on successfully timed Unite Spring dodges, which already has invincibility frames. Its utility is obvious, but it's kind of a little too good and easy if you ask me, and slows the pacing of the game down a bit. But if you're having trouble with the later stages in the game, then I do recommend using it. As far as things like Auto Guts and Hero Sense go, they just don't promote good play. So unless you're using them for something super specific, I just wouldn't recommend it. Since I think defense is often the thing most people don't even know that they don't understand, I decided to put it right at the beginning. Also, once you get used to all the things that you can do, it'll make your combos better, your time completion better, and obviously not getting a hit, so it affects every aspect of your rank. But I think it's time to move on from this and go on to another lesson. Lesson 2. The Wonderliner. So now we move on to one of the most unique aspects about this game, the drawing mechanic, or what's known as the Wonderliner. The first thing I'm going to do is give you advice on actually drawing the morphs, since it does have a bit of a learning curve. I'll give you some general advice, but you should take some time in figuring out what works best for you. A lot of people in the community have said you should think of them as fighting game inputs, and that makes some sense, but at least you have a chance to correct your errors. So obviously you use the right stick to draw, and then use the attack button to bring out the weapon you want. But if you use the dash button, it'll cancel it if it's going badly or you change your mind. The easiest ones are Unite Sword and Unite Hand, which I imagine no one has a problem with. I think the real issue is when Unite Whip and everything else introduced afterwards come into play. Unite Hammer being one of the most notoriously difficult morphs to draw. The first tip I'm going to give you is actually to slow down a bit when you're drawing. The game slows down, so you don't need to rush it. Next is to pay close attention to the color of the morph. A slight twitch might completely change your morph. Once you gain confidence in these motions, you can learn to speed up. A lot of people give up and default to Sword, which is a horrible idea for reasons I'll go over later. As far as individual morphs go, let's start with Hammer, since it's the first morph that's actually pretty finicky. First, you want to make a straight line just like Unite Sword, Pause, then draw a circle like you were doing Unite Hand. If you do this little pause, it'll register much more clearly. After some practice, make sure to be able to do it in the other direction. This will help you immensely as you go further along in the game. Now, let's move on to Unite Claw. The key to not getting Unite Whip here is to make those edges really sharp. So you want to move it really straight. That's really the key to not getting Unite Whip in general, as it's the most lax morph to draw. Any kind of squiggly line just ends up becoming a whip. And Unite Bomb is pretty simple. Just do the mode for Unite Hand, then add a line, and you're good. The next tip is to watch your surroundings. Sometimes certain objects will block or interact with the Wonderliner and potentially mess up your morphs. This is more common if you choose to get the attack liner, which of course is optional and up to you if you think it's worth it. The attack liner will damage your Wonderfuls if you run it into an armored enemy, thus knocking them away. Certain enemies are also too large to draw around. That's why I said earlier that being able to draw the morphs in any direction is a skill you need to master. A few last tips about the Wonderliner that will come in handy and smooth out your playing experience. You can actually pick up certain objects by simply placing it over them. So if there's some batteries in the corner, you can just draw the liner in that direction and then bam, you got them and you can just keep moving forward. Remember how I said getting hit knocks away all your heroes? Well, waking them up can be kind of annoying if you have around the 100 heroes or so. So something you can do is pick up a few and start picking up the rest with the Wonderliner. If you start getting really comfortable with this, you can get back on the offensive faster than ever. Okay, for this next section, I encourage people that feel like they're a little comfortable now to skip. Of course, now we're going to be talking about how to deal with enemies. Lesson 3. General Combat. The Wonderful 101 is an action game, so be prepared to be engaged in a lot of combat sequences. For the most part. There's a lot of creativity in how you choose to handle situations and execute your combos, but a big part of the game is using the right tool for the job, or at least for your opening move. A lot of people who end up giving up on the game usually resort to Unite Sword because of its ease to draw and use. And while that morph is incredibly useful, teamwork is more important, so it can fall a little short. Unite Sword doesn't have the best damage output, crumbles when facing against armored units, and generally speaking, doesn't usually create openings for you. Unite Hand is my go-to damage dealer. Unite Gun can create openings on unarmored enemies by stunning them with its Stinger ability, and then going in with another morph. When you're juggling an opponent or trying to reach a boss, that's where Unite Sword can shine thanks to its long reach. While Unite Gun has a better combo build up for points, and Hand gets the damage done, Sword works in the middle ground. So you can do something like open up with Gun, start to juggle with Sword, and then finish off with Hand. If you played a lot of action games, you know a large part of the gameplay is dealing with multiple enemies and crowds, and that's no different here. The larger Getrix usually have a good number of dogus surrounding them, and you don't want to leave them unattended since their attacks can overlap with others, making them much more difficult to handle. This is another area that I feel Unite Sword is actually quite good in. I usually go in, create a Unite Sword multi-morph, another recommended power to buy, or just a morph a large one myself and deal with them straight away. So while Unite Sword won't be your main source of damage, it will help you maintain control. Continuing on the concept of crowd control, Unite Gun's multi-morph is a great way to knock them out if you want to deal with them later. When facing two larger enemies such as two turtles, you should be trying to bait out the weakness of one while maintaining focus on the other. It's a weird concept, but it's essential when facing the tougher enemies of this game, especially if they have a ranged attack or a gap closer. Again, if you play a lot of action games, you know how important visual and audio cues are, so make sure you familiarize yourself with them. Certain gap closers can be performed off camera, but since their audio cues are so distinct, it's still on you to recognize them. If you've played only a little bit but are now watching this guide, you might have noticed me using some attacks that you don't have at the beginning, such as the Stingers, Rising, and Cyclone attacks. Those are all unlocked by frequent use of the Unite morphs, and ranking each of them up. Here's another tip for you. Each Wonderful has its own rank, and ranking them up will help you gain these moves faster. So in between missions, you can switch them out by pressing select on your controller, or its equivalent, and simply picking the one you want to use. Although this isn't required, as your heroes will rank up on their own. This will just speed up the process, as being the team leader ranks them up quicker. Another thing you need to do in combat is drawing the appropriately sized weapon. Sometimes the smaller ones are good enough to get the job done. When you need the extra range or strength, make sure to draw the largest morph that you reasonably can. There's 4 different sizes. The larger it is, the stronger it'll get. The downside is how many heroes it takes to get these morphs this big, and the amount of Unite gauge you use up. So if you think an enemy is taking too long to take down, chances are your morph is just too small for the task, which again leads back to the tip I gave you earlier at the beginning of the video. Always be on the lookout for additional heroes to recruit. It's all about teamwork, and the more teammates you have, the better. Speaking of teamwork, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the team attack. It works as the game's lock-on and will allow you to home in on targets. Enemies will also get stunned if enough heroes are piled on. There are many different layers to the Wonderful 101's combat, and don't let what I just said here overwhelm you. It comes more naturally than you think. That's also part of the reason why I think this section should be skipped if you can. This game's combat ends up being a natural evolution as you get better, but it won't be unplayable or incomprehensible without that knowledge. Since I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you now, I think it's best that we move on to a different topic. Lesson 4. The shop and what you should buy. So the shop is one of the most important aspects of the game, and it can lead to interesting and unique playthroughs. There's a lot of freedom with what you can buy or just completely ignore. Now the remaster really points you to the shop and heavily encourages you to unite guts and unite spring. So I want to give you what I think are the most useful things to buy for a first time player after you've made those purchases. I've made references to many things that you could buy, but not all of the things are available from the start, and you're always just going to have a limited number of O parts. So having a little tree to follow might be helpful. So I'll give you a few you can start with and what to work towards. The first thing I like to buy is the speed charge block. Since Guts and Spring work so well in the early chapters, you don't really need another defensive option right away. Speed Charge builds up your Unite gauge much quicker, so you can get back on the offensive or the defensive much quicker, making it a fantastic passive block. Another great passive ability is the Speedliner, which lets you draw morphs much quicker. I don't think I really need to explain the utility that comes along with it. Something a little more expensive that will increase your offense is Multi-Unite. You should try to obtain this morph as early as possible, even though they are quite expensive. You can create multiple Unite morphs with it by drawing the morph and using the team attack button instead of the regular attack button. Each additional level up of this skill will give you another simultaneous morph to use, capping out at 4. This greatly increases every facet of your offense, from combos, easier crowd control, and better damage output. You should also look into getting Unite Charge, since as we explained earlier, using a larger morph greatly increases your damage and range. But that being said, manually redrawing morphs takes time. Holding down the button is much more natural and faster. Once you start getting your juggle game up, look into Unite Tombstone to extend your combos even further. For an expensive defensive block, I personally would recommend Ukemi. Since you're probably going to be hit anyway, this will give you some opportunity to recover not only some of your health, but some of your rank if you pull it off successfully. You should also strive to learn the defenses that you naturally have, if you include Guts. I would also recommend Hero Time if you're having tough time on Operation 5 and above, which is roughly when it'll be available. At this point, you're probably asking yourself, how would I supposed to afford all these expensive items? Well, I'm glad you asked. So if you may have noticed, if you've been exploring the way I told you to, that you would have picked up space vegetables. Well, you should save and keep track of just how many of them you have. Go into the menu, and once you get 30 of each, you can craft a credit card to purchase something for free. This will allow you to get a powerful block early, so definitely don't waste them on crafting healing items. To add to that, don't waste your ore parts on healing items either. They also might be hiding in destructibles. Another thing that you should consider is that skills and Unite Morphs purchases are always with you for as long as you want. Blocks are limited, you'll slowly gain more blocks to place, but there's always going to be a limited amount. At this point, I've given you advice on many different concepts. But the truth is, you still have to put in the work. When I play a game, I usually don't have to try very hard. I'm not trying to brag, but most games just don't really require that much effort. The Wonderful 101 is one of those unique games that, outside of its various gameplay traits, it also trusts the player enough to learn its intricacies. It takes effort to learn the game, but it respects you enough that I'm happy to return the favor. And it pays off more than you could possibly imagine. All it took for me was to watch someone who knew what they were doing for a single minute to see what I was missing. And if I hadn't done that, I probably would have written the game off. I really hope that anyone who tries this game can have as great a time as I do when I'm playing it. So I hope this guide helps even one person to enjoy this game. If you found this video helpful or enjoyed it, I would be more than happy if you considered subscribing. With that, I'll see you next mission.
Fantastic! Wonderful Mart! To fend off my attack. Most admirable.
Identify yourself.
At last, I lay eyes on the pathetic planet CHIQ. What do you call it? Dearth?
Dearth? Wait, Blue, is that like the official name?
Are you kidding me? Ah, did I make an error? I could have sworn that the guidebook says...
Hand over that book immediately.